Today we've got another request, Duffy's Malt Whiskey Company, and it's a nice looking bottle. So let's go see the story behind this fine looking bottle on this episode of Antique Bottle Stories. So today's story is about a guy named Walter Bernard Duffy. He was born in 1840 in Canada. His parents were born in Ireland and they moved to Canada. They had a few kids, and then when Walter was about 1, they moved to New York and they had a few more kids. His dad had a corner store where he sold groceries and liquors. Walter was married to Teresa and they had 10 kids, but one of them died early. She ended up dying really young in 1884, and then he married Loretta, who was 25 years younger than him. His obituary says at age 17 he became a clerk at his dad's cider refining business, and in 1868, when he was 28, he took over the business. Walter learned to become observant. He explained to his dad that certain events caused a rise in the value of certain commodities. With this information, he asked his dad for some money to begin his own business venture. His dad wasn't so sure and he didn't give him the money. But Walter was very confident in himself and he went somewhere else for the loan. It says within a few weeks he had cleared a profit of $6,000. Here's a quote from this article. Mr. Duffy was a man of foresight, with a wide grasp of affairs, of great daring based upon full confidence in himself, of quick decision, excellent judgment, and a close student of details. It continues, every line of business upon which he entered appeared to be endowed with new life and respond to his magic touch. He was a director of multiple companies, a fruit company, a hotel, insurance company, mining companies, president of a bank, just to name a few. This also says that he gave freely of his wealth. I was able to get pretty far back, so let's start at Walter's dad, Edward, in 1850, before the Civil War. Edward is a grocer, and in this 1851 directory, we see an address of 247 State Street, which is now this parking garage. 1860, Walter is 20, and we saw that he started working with his dad at age 17, and this confirms that he's a clerk at his dad's place. 1861, Edward has an ad in the directory. It says, importer of wines, liquors, cordials, and cigars. Also, rectifier of whiskey, refiner of cider, and manufacturer of pure cider vinegar. Cider put up in wood or bottle, warranted to keep in any climate. Here's 1868. Edward is still listed on State Street. 1870. Edward is 62 and he says he's a retired liquor dealer. What's interesting is so many of the grown kids are still at home. Walter's 30 and he's running the distillery. We see in the directory that he's partnered with a guy named William Donahue, and the company is now called Walter B. Duffy and Company. I just realized that I don't know the name of the store that his dad was running. Going back to 1861, it's just his name and that he's an importer. Now, looking at the address, it looks like they moved to 8 and 10 White Street. It would have looked like this. Now, it looks like this. There's a 10 on the door, and it's a dead-end street. It's definitely possible that that brick could be the original building. Now, in 1875, it shows Walter showing at 8, 10, and 12 White Street. We see in 1877 Walter B. Duffy and Company, and it shows his dad as his business partner at this point. Now, here's what it would have looked like. We've grown a little bit. Then the following year, we see another name listed here, W.D. Duffy Cider Company, in addition to the main company. Albert Bigelow is his new partner. 1880 census, here's Walter with his first wife Teresa, and they have 6 out of their 10 kids. 3 boys and 3 girls so far. Now she dies just 4 years later after she's had all those young babies. Also in 1880, it was stated at the headquarters of the Democratic State Committee tonight that Charles J. Burke had resigned as electoral candidate and Walter B. Duffy was substituted. Now we go through another change here. In 1881, we still see the Cider Company, and in 1882, he's now president of the Rochester Distilling Company, not to be confused with the Rochester Brewing Company. Notice that the address is now 27 and 29 Lake Avenue, so that takes us to this building. 1885 is when I see the first ad in the paper covering the entirety of the page. A few clues in this ad. Here it shows that there's a location in Baltimore, and there's a little photo here, I'm assuming of the Baltimore location. And here's a nice little photo of the 1885 bottle, and the whiskey claims to be a cure for all kinds of diseases. This guy stays the trademark for the business. He's on their labels, which, by the way, this is how the bottle looks with the label on it, and all their merchandise. It's a scientist stating that this whiskey is the purest he's ever analyzed, and here it claims to cure malaria and stomach ailments. So I went to see when the Baltimore location opened, and I went through the Baltimore directories. It wasn't in the 1883 directory. It skips 84, but then it is in the 85 directory. So I guess it happened in 84. What's weird is that I never see it listed in the directory again after 1885, and I'm not sure why. The Baltimore plant was at 53 South Street in Baltimore, and that brings us to this corner, but there isn't a building numbered 53 anymore. Here's the 1885 Rochester directory. The Cider Company is on 8 more, and that looks like this now. The distillery is at 67 Lake Avenue, and that brings us to this building. It's not numbered the same anymore, but look above the door. It says RD Co. I can only assume that's Rochester Distilling Company. I guess that's not a door anymore either. And I can't tell if this building is being used. Anyways, I've made a chart to keep track of the 3 current companies. In 1886, another full-page ad in the paper, full of testimonies. Here's another 1886 claiming it will make you hearty, complete with testimonials about how much weight people had gained with it. Here's an 1886 article. It says, in Rochester lives a Walter B. Duffy, about 40 years of age, and reputed to be quite wealthy. He lives in handsome style on Lake Avenue, the fashionable street of the city. And I've looked around and I don't think his house still stands anymore, by the way. It says, Mr. Duffy is the principal owner of the Rochester Distilling Company, which manufactures whiskeys. He's also a large real estate owner in Rochester and in Charlotte. In May 1884, he was one of a party of gentlemen who organized the Duffy Malt Whiskey Company, talking about the Baltimore location. The company succeeded George Fleckenstein in business, so this was an established business. And at the end of the article it says Mr. Duffy succeeded Mr. Robb as president of the Baltimore location in February 1885. Now skipping ahead to 1890, we see Rochester Distilling Company now listing Duffy Pure Malt Whiskey in the ad. Now, it used to be that the Rochester Distilling was just listed in Rochester, and then the Duffy Malt Whiskey Company was listed in Baltimore. Now it seems maybe they're combined. The Distilling and Malt Whiskey Company are on the same address on Lake Avenue, and the Cider Company is still listed. I think the Cider Company is gone the next year in 1891 though. There is an annual report in January of 1891, but the 1891 directory doesn't list it. And I checked out the next several years and it's not listed in there anymore. So let's update this. Now let's skip ahead to 1895. It lists Malt Whiskey and Rochester Distilling as one and the same. In 1896, Duffy had a guy named John Bond painting inside of his house. When the paint ran out, he was sent to the basement to get more. The basement was dark and he fell down the stairs and broke his neck and died. Now in 1898, there's an electric railway underway and Walter Duffy is treasurer of that project. Now, the 1900 census shows Duffy with his second wife, Loretta. In fact, it shows here that they've been married 8 years now. They don't have any kids together, and 4 of his adult children still live with him. Here's a 1900 ad in the paper claiming there's a guy here who's 118 years old, and I can give you one guess on how he made it that long. It says, I'm 118 years and 6 months old, and I keep up my vitality by the constant use of Duffy's pure malt whiskey. It keeps me in perfect health. I take it in a punch 4 times a day, and I always put a small quantity in each glass of water I drink. It kills the germs. Sounds like an alcoholic to me. Here's another one. Consumption never cures itself. Still in 1900, here's one of Duffy's many businesses that he's involved in. This one's a real estate company. He's president. Now this one's really funny. It says, statistics show that the greatest number of deaths in hot weather is caused by drinking ice water. A New York physician says if everyone put a small quantity of Duffy's malt whiskey in each glass of water, very few deaths would be caused by the heat. I'll have to remember that. Here's another dude, Hardy, at 97. Here in 1902, Duffy has bought a plot of land and plans to build a handsome hotel. In 1903, Duffy is elected president of Flower City National Bank. 1903, a very nice picture of what the bottle looks like. So let's compare. Now the monogram in the middle, the letters are a little bit more squared in the later one. But also notice the 1885 one is a Baltimore bottle and the 1903 one is a Rochester bottle. In 1904, I was calling him a scientist, but this one says sold only in sealed packages with the, quote, old chemist trademark on the label. Substitutes are dangerous to patient and physician. Also in 1904, the company published a book called Medicine for All Mankind, being a short treatise on how to acquire and preserve health, which apparently you can buy at Walmart. 1905, clergymen endorse Duffy's pure malt whiskey. 1906, Duffy is elected president of the Duffy McInerney Company, and I didn't really look into what that company does. 1907 talks about this American fruit product company annual meeting. He's also the president of this one. 1908, the hotel is done, and he opened the doors for inspection for 3 hours, and an estimated 10,000 people came through the doors. 3,500 people an hour, it says. It says it was on the corner of Main Street and Plymouth Avenue. So let's go. Okay, so I found the address to be 95 West Main Street, and the intersection of Main and Plymouth are right here. Well, this is the even side on this side, so it's got to be this one here. So 1908, we're still advertising its medicinal effects. 1910, 69-year-old Walter and his wife Loretta have been together 17 years now. A son, James, and his wife are living there, as well as 3 servants and 2 nurses. 1910, another picture out of a magazine of one of the bottles. 1911, Walter Duffy dies after being ill for a year and a half. He's 70 years old, and in his will he left some money to different community projects as well as charities. This 1911 paper says that this one is the main office building to the distillery, while this over here is the plant in Waterloo, New York, covering 15 acres. I wonder when that one happened. Hey, but that main office building confirms that this is the building that we found. As a matter of fact, the office also included this part, which is really cool that this one's intact. Well, in 1906 is when the crackdown happened in the form of the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. This is dated 1912. For years, Duffy's malt whiskey has gone out to the public with the most flagrantly false and fraudulent claims made for it on the wrapper around the bottle. The government officials finally took action, and in 1908, a quantity of Duffy's malt whiskey was seized on the charge of being adulterated and misbranded under the Food and Drug Act. Now, this publication in 1912 scrutinizes the whiskey for its medicinal properties. A chemist had examined it and found it possessed no medicinal qualities. It says, "I have made an examination of the substance known as Duffy's malt whiskey. I found it contained no medicinal ingredients outside of the alcohol in the whiskey. It is a whiskey of very poor quality as a beverage." He goes on to say, "The taste of this bottle is indicative of a young whiskey or raw whiskey. It has not the full flavor and aroma of an aged whiskey." So, after Walter died, Edward and James are his sons, and I don't see either of them taking over the company. Edward is a clerk, and James is into insurance. James still lives at the hotel, though. 1915, we have another picture of the bottle, so let's put them together. Honestly, I don't think the 1915 is really any different than the 1903. I'm surprised to see in 1917, after all of that, that there's another claim here that the whiskey will make you well. In 1919, it shows a guy named Henry Naylon as president, and another ad in the paper, complete with one more picture of the bottle. But in 1920, an article here, it says, "In response to an inquiry regarding famous trade names of yesteryear, no longer before the public, begins by speaking of certain whiskey and beer names, like Duffy's Pure Malt Whiskey, which have died a natural death of prohibition." And in 1921, we no longer see the Malt Whiskey Company listed in the directory. By 1923, it's already regarded as an old-fashioned remedy, now forgotten. Now, that didn't take very long. So here's my completed chart for all your bottle dating purposes. And it was very difficult to find a Baltimore example online, and I would think to find one would be pretty rare, since it doesn't seem to have been there very long at that location. I found this photo which shows several sizes. That one's pretty cool. And here's a close-up of the label after the 1906 Food and Drug Act. So hopefully this helped fill in any gaps that you wanted to know about this story. And that's going to do it for this episode. Hope you have a great day, everybody, and thanks for watching.